If we want to understand disinformation, both in the global north and in the global south, we have to understand it within historical, social, and political dimensions. My name is Herman Wasserman. I'm a professor of journalism at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, and I conduct research on information disorder and disinformation in the global south. Our research shows that most of this work is focused on the global north, and there's a clear asymmetry in knowledge production on the topic. So we don't yet know enough about what is going on in the global south, and from what we know, there is also enough evidence to say that actually the global south has a longer history of these type of political disinformation and other aspects that the global north can actually learn from. So if we look at countries in the global south, they all share an experience of colonialism, for instance. They also share an experience of being marginalized in the global system. They often have authoritarian governments. They often have big social inequalities, ethnic tensions, racism, gender disparities. And these things are also present in the global north, but they have been in the global south very pronounced, and they have been around for a long time. There's been a lot of propaganda, political falsehoods, and all of this over the history has bred a distrust in official narratives and also a distrust in journalism, because often journalism and the media in these contexts are state-owned. So this, over the history, if we look at the history of colonialism and post-colonialism, this has given rise to alternative networks of communication like gossip and satire and jokes. In the past, this has often been used for progressive ends to undermine colonial power, but now this has also been used for disinformation. Another aspect that we see in the global south is a big reliance on messaging networks, such as WhatsApp, to some extent Telegram, and this is something that is also particularly strong in the global south. We have done research on WhatsApp, for instance, in places like India, Latin America, and Africa. A lot of hate speech circulates on WhatsApp because it is more difficult to regulate and more difficult to access and get entry to it. Yet at the same time, it is a major platform for people in the south. Yes, Russian disinformation is definitely present. So is Chinese disinformation, not only disinformation, but soft power, propaganda, etc. Especially in the case of China, that's been around for quite a number of years already. The question, however, is what is the impact? And that, again, is difficult to assess. So Russia was supportive of liberation movements in Africa. They now draw on that historical loyalty. There is a long-standing distrust of the West, and they're going back all the way to colonialism. So the question is this disinformation that is having a direct impact, or is disinformation adding on and amplifying some of these attitudes that have been there for a long time? Only then, when we understand the context well, can we design better responses. There are many organizations in the South working in the areas of fact-checking, media literacy, policy and regulation. So really inspiring movements. And what we often see with them is that they combine things. They combine, for instance, investigative journalism with fact-checking and media literacy, or they combine activism around access to information with regulation and moderation of disinformation. The problem is very intricate, and it has very different dimensions, and one has to address this holistically. So just to parachute in, or just to transplant information or models from the north to the south, might lose some of that granularity of context. And so that's really important. And in our research, we have also constantly emphasized this, that there is a need for really deep contextual knowledge and deep contextual research in order to tailor the best responses. So there has been a boom in fact-checking. Not all of those fact-checking organizations have always been sustainable. So the problem is also that the funding often comes from Western organizations, or that fact checkers collaborate with social media platforms like Meta and do their fact checking for them. The way that these platforms often treat the fact checkers and moderations in places like Africa in itself is a problem. We know that they are not treated always as well as their counterparts in the North, but that's maybe a different discussion. But because of this funding and because of this association with the North, there has been some pushback, and people are saying, well, you are doing the bidding of the North, and these fact-checking organizations are really only in the pocket of the West. So there's been some reactionary movements against that. So we have to understand that media literacy also relates to access to information and data and the internet. So you cannot expect people to be media literate and critique information that they cannot go and fact check themselves because they don't have access to Google, for instance, or search engines. So they might receive something on WhatsApp. It's low data costs, it's cheap, and they can forward it, but they don't have the data and the access to go and fact check it themselves on Google. We've done research on media literacy in South African schools, often hampered by just the conditions in schools. Electricity is something as basic as electricity provision. Well, I think there is already a lot of ground for optimism in the sense that there are many organizations in the Global South working very actively and doing really inspiring work. And I think they need to be strengthened. So often funding is an issue, but it's also a matter of how we apply that funding. How do we design the methods around assistance and aid so that it is collaborative and that it's really context responsive. So with all those caveats, I do think there is hope and there is grounds for optimism.